I'm Tim, welcome to Watch One, thanks for logging on. Today we're looking at the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore forged carbon, 44 millimeters with a combination of forged carbon, ceramic, and titanium. You can see this upsized Royal Oak Offshore on our website, watchyouwant.com. And if you enjoy these videos and you'd like to see more, please check out our website, watchyouwant.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Watch You Want Inc. Now you can see on my wrist 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference. The 2011 to present reference that I have on my wrist here takes all of the essential styling facets of the first iconic Royal Oak Offshores, and it just ups the ante in terms of finish, materials quality, and styling detailing. Now let's start with the case itself, because the case and the strap determine ergonomics. You can see that it does fill my wrist from side to side. You can see that realistically, this is probably the lower limit for wrist size to comfortably and securely wear this watch. Now, the weight is not what's going to get you if you have a smaller wrist, because the case in ceramic, that's the bezel and the chronograph pushers, titanium, that's the pusher crown guards, and forged carbon, that's the case base itself. The watch does not have a lot of heft to it. It's got substance to it, and it feels all of a piece, but it's not the overbearing mass that you might expect of a steel or precious metal watch with these proportions. And the proportions are really what determine whether or not this watch is going to be to your taste, because they measure a massive 44 millimeters across the diagonal portion of the round portion of the case. And as you can see with the crown guard, that's almost nothing. There is almost no point at which this watch is 44 millimeters in diameter. It's almost always more. And the extremity of that would be lug to lug, where the watch measures a burly 56 millimeters. And there's a little bit more to the story, because you can see how the plots, the metallic plots that link the case and the strap, actually add a little bit of flair. So if you were to measure the outer edge of the strap to the outer edge of the strap, the watch swells to a really burly lumberjack-like 63 millimeters. If you want a watch that can cope with a huge wrist, and your concern isn't so much whether it will be too big, but whether the watch you buy will be too small, rest assured, this one is built as big as you are, and I don't care who you are. I'd say most guys could probably wear this comfortably on their leg. But, to its credit, everything that touches the skin is to the highest standard and wonderfully comfortable, starting with this gorgeous natural vulcanized rubber AP diver strap. This is a unit that debuted in the early 2000s and ran through the mid to late 2000s, first on the Vempe, then the Scuba, and finally the Diver models. And it became so popular because of its comfort and its ability to make the Royal Oak Offshore accommodate a smaller wrist, that owners started ordering it from AP and AP dealers as an aftermarket accessory. What it does here is it sort of meets you halfway. If you do have a smaller wrist, like the size of mine, the strap gives you the flexibility to add just a little bit more bend, a little bit more curve than the hornback rigid leather. The alligator strap, we all know the hornback leather alligator strap that's kind of iconic of the offshore, but it's not to every taste. And if you want an offshore, but you know the hornback isn't for you, the diver strap gives you more flexibility, both in terms of ergonomics and in terms of usage. Because fully water resistant, you can now take the offshore in the water without having to swap straps or think twice. With the screw down crown, it is 100 meter, 330 foot water resistant, and with the convenience of a pin buckle, makes for easy adjustability in hot weather or during activity when the wrist expands, or in cold weather and inactivity when the wrist contracts. Ergonomically, this is the solution, and it's aided and abetted by this outstanding forged carbon case. Now, forged carbon is something that AP brought to the watch industry, and in my opinion still does better than anyone. This is something that actually starts its life looking more like sprouts, honestly. Just a combination of formless, shapeless, almost colorless grayscale threads. They go into a mold with resin and then cooked and later cured at temperatures up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. They become this rigid, unitary block that's then machined down and hand finished into an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore case. Now, the beauty of it is that no two are ever alike, because the way those threads finally come to rest within the layup can never be duplicated from one to the next. And because they do have a little bit of a chaotic pattern, sort of like a high-tech marbling, it's very difficult to see scratches or scuffs on this watch. It hides them very well, and it's more resistant to fracturing than ceramic. Also extremely light. It gives you a lot of utility in as much as it's lightweight, it's relatively resistant to showing scuffs or damage, and it's also a fascinating sort of exercise in applied science, an example of how less can be more, less mass that is, in the luxury watch sector. Now a ceramic bezel caps this one, and it's finished to the same standard as any metal AP Offshore or Royal Oak bezel. Polished on its sides, it's brushed on its tops, and it features gorgeous contrasting inset polished stainless steel bezel bolts. So you still have that link to the original Gerald Genta Royal Oak, but in a completely different paradigm. Oversized, sporty, highly durable, whereas the original Royal Oak used white inset bezel bolts, white gold that is. These are all polished stainless steel, befitting the rugged image and oftentimes less than light-duty applications and uses to which owners subject these. It's a true sports watch in the rough and tumble sense, but it's a fine one, and you can see inboard of the bezel a dial with depth, texture, and quite a bit of finery in its own right. The hands and all of the applied hour indices are polished white gold. Now there is a what's known as mega tapisserie hobnail pattern to the dial. This is a larger, blockier, and more exquisitely textured version of the original tapisserie that debuted on the 1993 Royal Oak Offshore, itself inspired by the Royal Oak. What the larger block gives you is, I would say, a more masculine look, a more forceful look, and also better visual access to the textures on top of the blocks themselves and between them. And that's one of the secrets to all Audemars Piguet tapisserie dials that often becomes lost due to the fineness of the engraving. They have a great deal of texture in between the principal blocky forms. The blocks are faceted. In between them, the channels have almost a hobnail pattern of their own with a very fine grain that is easier to appreciate in the larger size. All of the sub-registers are sunken into the tapisserie for an extra measure of texture and depth, and they do themselves feature concentric circular guilloche within, as well as differentiation in terms of how they're calibrated, from the constant seconds at 12 o'clock to the minutes register at 9 to the hours register at 6. And of course we have a tachometer scale base 1000 to provide a little bit of utility, but principally to slope down from the bezel and visually unify the transition from the hoods of the bezel to the depths of the dial itself. And on the caseback, still more nuance, with the Audemars Piguet in-house caliber 3126 hitched to a 3840 chronograph module. Now this is the in-house movement at its best. You can see gorgeous finish, also a display back. This wasn't always the case with the Offshore. For a long time, really until the 2004 Juan Pablo Montoya Special Edition, they were always solid caseback. And it really wasn't until the late 2000s that we started to see the display casebacks on a regular basis. And with the 2011 debut of the regular production 44mm case, we finally had a series production Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore with both the in-house movement finished to a much higher standard than the previous JLC and a sapphire display caseback so that we could appreciate it in its entirety. Now what we have here, to compound the effect, is a blackened and skeletonized winding rotor. The rotor itself winds bidirectionally, so it doesn't have that kind of wobbly, unweighted, unidirectional winding action that the unidirectional systems have. But to make up for the small loss of efficiency from going bidirectional, which is more refined but less efficient, let's admit, Audemars Piguet adds ceramic rotor bearings so it runs completely unlubricated for minimal drag. That also makes it a system that's sealed for life, so the rotor will never wear out and require replacement, as so often happens with automatic winders. You'll notice the dual-anchored balance bridge with the capped and fixed stud holder. This is a free-sprung Gyromax-style balance anchored with a balance bridge Rolex style. So whereas the Offshore has always been rough and tumble on the outside, the JLC-powered variants weren't super durable inside. Fine and beautifully built, yes, but they didn't have the heart of a sports watch. The in-house movement absolutely does, and with a superior 50-hour power reserve, it'll also keep the beat for long after you take it off your wrist, for those times when you want to keep your watch set properly, but perhaps a big, burly, all blacked-out sports watch isn't the number for the night. Nevertheless, with outstanding endurance of 50 hours, a Dubois de Praz chronograph module from the best in the business in terms of manufacturing chronograph architectures, this is an outstanding complement to the technology and style of the forged carbon case and ceramic bezel. 59 jewels, 365 parts. This is the definition of haute de gamme watchmaking in terms of finish and engineering. The dial, like I said, combines the white gold and the tapisserie with the depth of the guilloche and the tachometer, and the case itself, 15 millimeters thick, has just enough stance above the wrist to give it presence, but not so much height if you look at the slope of the bezel that you couldn't pull it off with a sport jacket, maybe even a looser dress cuff if you wanted. If you're the type who can pull this thing off in formal attire, my hat's off to you. For the rest of us who plan to wear this one for good times, not necessarily genteel times, you can see it, and if you like, you can take it home from our website, watchyouwant.com.